professor, a philosophy professor, who in some context shared an experience he had had when he was a kid. He had gone to a kind of carnival or circus in which there was a clown standing on his head, juggling, and he was just fascinated with it. Later, after he was thinking about it, when he had gone home, he realized he had seen better clowns, better acrobats, and actually also better in almost every way what had been happening there, but he had not seen all of those done together. Better clowns, better acrobats, yes, but not all of those done together. And that was what had fascinated him. And so likewise, for Teilhard, it became an image for me that in some ways, with Teilhard, we have a scientist, but there undoubtedly were and are better scientists, better philosophers, better theologians. But what fascinates us is his capacity to integrate all of these together, which is certainly something the world needs, for which we thirst, especially in our own lives, a deeper sense of integration. So it's not as if our scientific world is over here, our faith over here, our spiritual or religious practice over here, that Teilhard had this capacity for synthesis, for bringing them together. But it is important for us to realize that professionally speaking, he was a scientist with a deep commitment to science, and his field was particularly paleontology and geology. In fact, almost immediately after being ordained to the priesthood as a Jesuit priest in the early 1900s, he had been born in 1881, but shortly before the First World War, 1912 to 1914, he studied paleontology at the Museum of Natural History in Paris. After that, he was called into service in the First World War, and so his studies were interrupted. But then as they came to a close, it was in 1921 that he was able to complete his doctoral thesis, which was on mammals in the lower Eocene period, a certain period in the history, the story of evolution. And so given that work in paleontology and the study, therefore, of fossils, especially human origins, you can see his scientific bent towards understanding an evolutionary worldview. And after completing his doctoral work, he taught, in fact, geology and paleontology at the Institut Catholique in Paris for a number of years, and later became renowned when he spent many years in China. On one of his periods of time in China, he was involved, in fact, in the discovery of Sinanthropus, or what today most of us would call Peking man. And so he was very involved in the story of the Catholic Church's effort to come to grips with this evolutionary reality. So that's one thing. He's a scientist professionally, but a thinker for sure, and clearly a man of faith, and therefore in his own way, even if not completely professionally, a theologian. And later I will suggest that perhaps his capacity to synthesize and integrate these has something to do with a mystical bent. In fact, my hunch would be 20 years from now, as people look back and reflect upon the life of Teilhard and his contribution, they will see him more as a mystic than perhaps as a scientist, philosopher, or theologian, which in its own way is an invitation to us as well, to see our own openness to, call toward mysticism, a word that we might not always feel comfortable with. We might not think of thinking of ourselves as mystics, and yet the Second Vatican Council had as a major emphasis the universal call to holiness. Certainly,